Welcome to the Wisdom Podcast, another edition here with Jason Cercone. So podcasting is one of my favorite topics. As most of you know, I spend 80 to 90% of my days podcasting, very, very bullish on podcasting. We've just seen sales shift in such a different direction this year. It used to be sort of win-lose if you want. And nowadays sales is very much more about winning and winning. So suggesting to hop on a podcast is one of my favorite offers to see if I can potentially work with someone. Plus I get insights, plus I get great guests like Jason. This podcast has been brought to you by podbuyer.com. If you want to start, scale, or be invited to a podcast like this one. Jason, welcome to the pod. Can you tell us a bit more about what you do and what occupies your time nowadays?
Well, thanks for having me, Charles. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your audience today. Podcasting pretty much consumes my life. I help coaches and consultants build solo podcasts and also working with law firms to help them build purpose-driven podcasts as well. I've been in the podcasting space for coming up on 9 years at this point as we sit and talk today, and have seen a lot go up and a lot go down and a lot change and evolve in this space. And it's great to be a part of it. Podcasting can be such a valuable asset if you understand the proper strategies on how to do it right, and you're actually looking to build something with purpose. If you start a podcast just for the sake of starting a podcast, more than likely you're going to fall flat because you just have no purpose behind what you're doing. You don't know who you're trying to speak to. And when you don't see immediate results, you instantly start to play those tricks in your mind that this isn't for me, or this isn't working, or I'm not good enough for this. But if you come into podcasting with a very clear, realistic goal and you set expectations that are actually attainable, podcasting can be very valuable for your brand. And it can add another asset to your brand that makes it even more valuable should you ever decide to exit. So that's the world I'm existing in today, and I'm damn proud to be a part of it.
Love it. Yeah, you can build a full community on that back end. You can have your existing services as well as an agency, for example, and still keep on offering what you do. And instead of just pitching these folks on a first sales podcast, try to actually speak with them, go with the win-win offer with let's hop on a podcast and develop the conversation from there. I'm curious to see how you're doing that with law firms. I mean, it's quite interesting because they can't say some things online, some of these things they cannot say. So how do you build a profitable podcast for them?
Well, that's actually a great question that I'm not officially equipped to answer as of today. I throw that out there because I know on the live streaming side of this might not be the most valuable, but as this lives in the evergreen world, this may be something that I can speak more to. But this is an initiative that I'm just launching on my own side of business. And I've partnered with a PR firm to also work with some of their law firms. And we haven't officially begun the work yet. They've said that, or what they've told me is they've had many of their clients asking how they can use this type of content most effectively. So I've started to dig into this a little deeper so I can be a better resource and help them build that content. For me, I look at it how a lot of brands and even law firms, if you look through TikTok, you look through Instagram, the type of content they're creating is giving their listener more of an inside look into what they're experiencing in their life and how their firm can best serve them. So if they've had an injury at work, or if there's something that is impacting their life where they need legal representation to get the best results, how do they know they're putting their trust in the right brand? And it's those brands that are putting themselves out there and giving that type of information away for free in a way that it doesn't necessarily give away the whole kit and caboodle, but it does provide enough information that it establishes trust, which is another major reason why I advise anyone that has purpose in what they want to create to lean into podcasting, because that trust can be established in such a powerful way that when a person does decide, okay, it's time for me to take the next step, I need to make a buying decision, who can I turn to? Well, I've already been listening to this brand over here, and they've given me tons of insight that have guided me to this point. It's only natural that I continue to put my trust in them. So extrapolating where this is going, I feel that's going to be the way that I'm advising law firms and anybody I work with on how to leverage podcasting and build content that's going to serve you for a long time into the future. It's not about what can happen today. That's part of it. but it's all about putting that information out there that people can turn to and utilize as a resource for months, even years to come.
Yeah, I think law firms should take a bit more risks, and either talk with clients that's cases solved and either blur some parts or not and make good content out of that, like X business owners that faced X lawsuit and got Y results working with that firm could be fun, conversational style. Another one could be live calls. And you could blur the person's name or whatever like is better for them and provide live advice on the phone, in like 3 to 5 minutes. Not Judge Judy style, but sort of, Judge Judy, I think she built an empire for herself. Very, very successful.
Indeed.
Your podcast, why did you actually started it? What was the main reason back in the days as per why you got into that?
Well, when I first got into podcasting, this is a pretty unique story and a unique dive into this world. It was out of spite, and it's something I don't advise anybody to do, but it's a good story for me to tell because back when I got into this in 2015, it was still somewhat wild, wild west. I think even to a degree, we still experience some of that in the podcast space. However, I do feel you need to be more purpose-driven today just because there is so much content out there. Not just podcast content, but content in general. We're getting inundated on a daily basis. But in 2015, when podcasting was still kind of new, but kind of somewhat established, I started something. I was working in the beer industry and I started a beer app. It was an app that would help consumers in Pittsburgh, where I'm located, find events and find happenings and beer releases. It was just designed to be this little hub that could connect beer enthusiasts to the information they needed or would like to see. I don't know how much they needed it, but it is what it is. And I was having some fun with it. And I had gotten some partners and some breweries and bars and restaurants that signed on with me to advertise their goods and their wares and their events through my app. The day I launched it, I got a troll on Twitter out of nowhere telling me how horrible my ideas were and how terrible this was. And it was never going to succeed and yada, yada, yada. I just had never experienced anything on that level before. So I probably engaged with him a little bit too much, just arguing and whatever. But in the midst of all that, I said to myself, what does this guy do? Why does this guy feel he has a strong enough opinion to tell me I'm doing everything wrong? So I went and looked at his profile and discovered he was host of a beer podcast. And it just so happened that a friend of mine and I had been kicking around some ideas for a podcast, but we couldn't land on anything that we really wanted to run with. And when I saw that, it just instantly clicked in my head. I called my friend and said, we're going to start a beer podcast and we're going to do it better than that guy. And my buddy was a beer enthusiast too. He said, that sounds great. Let's do it. And we put next to no planning into it. We just got mics and a cheap mixing board off of Amazon, sat down at a noisy bar that was one of my partners, but they were doing trivia night that night, unbeknownst to me. So our first recording was in this incredibly noisy environment. We had no direction on content. We hit record. We put something down. We did zero editing, put it on the internet and said we had a podcast. We got humbled very quickly. And I immediately realized that no, I wasn't going to be as good as that guy. And there was a lot that I was going to need to learn in order to be successful with podcasting. At the same time, it got me started because I did radio in college, absolutely loved it. And this was, to me, the next step in that. I never thought I'd be coming back to that. But 13 years later, after graduating college, here I was in front of a microphone again. And I decided to just lean into it and start getting better. And over the years, I've practiced and I continue to work on my voice and my delivery and utilize this medium to the best of my ability, but never get complacent with my skill set. So that was how I broke in, which again, a little unique. And at the end of the day, I have to thank that troll for sparking all of this inspiration inside of me.
Quite funny, right? Like there's always two ways. Well, one is the positive and like, oh, I want to reach this goal. And this other is like, yeah, let me prove that person wrong. It's not that one is right and the other is wrong. Both can coexist actually. Trolls, at some point, they're just like mosquitoes, like if you can smash one quickly and minimize your time and energy output, then do it. But once you have 15,000 of them, better let yourself sting. and just develop
Yeah.
the internal immunity to that, which is not giving a fuck.
That's right. You're absolutely
You're
right.
I'm on your website here. So you also have a mastermind on the back end. So tell me about the full funnel here, how you get the guests invited, who, right? If you prepare to do the interview with the guest, and then what happens after the pod.
Well, what you're looking at, if you're on my website looking at my mastermind, is something that I just launched, and I'm going to be working on doing a lot of this through podcast guesting and connecting with coaches and consultants in different online communities. That's the approach I've decided to go with to make those connections to bring people into the mastermind. The way I structured the mastermind was to be a little bit more intimate in regards to size. At least in the very beginning, I want it to be no more than 10 people plus me as the mediator, guide, coach person that's leading the way through this whole thing. But every mastermind within that 60-day window in which it exists, from start to finish, I'm teaching key concepts on how to be a better, more confident podcaster, how to utilize that content to the best of your ability. And then by time we get to the end, before that 60-day period is up, if you don't already have a podcast in existence, you will. We'll have built your podcast and launched it so you have it up and running. The community will then grow outside of that, because I don't want to just cut everybody loose and say, okay, you got a podcast now, go do it. Because we know the stigma in the podcast world that so many people start and then stop. There's more of those cases out there than there are podcasts that are launched and then continue to build and grow over time. But having that continued community support, I feel, is going to be a great advantage to anybody that comes into this. So the more masterminds I run, the more people enter the community. This is all people helping each other stay motivated to build their content. So also within there, you're learning the ins and outs of building an infrastructure, understanding what it truly takes to build a successful podcast, not just sitting down and pressing record and throwing something out on the internet. As I told my story before, I learned that does not work. So I want to take what I've learned over 8+ years in this space and help anybody that's looking to get started on the right foot, do it in a very powerful fashion, and then have others they can turn to so they can get continued support and build on everything that they're doing. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of what I've got with my new mastermind program.
Love it. And when we started this pod, actually, before you asked me, how can I make this the best podcast ever? I'm curious as per who do you interview on the podcast and how you filter them to make sure that they produce the best content ever.
Who do I interview on the podcast? My podcast, or
right?
My podcast is mainly solo. And that was really the direction that I decided to go, because I feel solo content is underrated and underused. Guest content is great. Don't get me wrong. Having powerful conversations can truly lead to a number of big breakthroughs, but there's a lot more preparation that goes into that. And the guest is typically spotlighted as the main thought leader when you have them on your podcast. If you develop content that's more on the solo side, you're the person, you're the resource that people are turning to. As they learn more about you and what you do, they establish that trust that's incredibly important. And you can take them from that point of just dipping your toes to find a little bit more about what you're doing. And if you can truly get them to where they need to go, to let's do this. I want to sign up for your course. I want to buy your book. I want to get into your offer, employer services, whatever your long-term goal is. When you create that solo content that establishes that trust and gives people some of the pieces of the puzzle that will get them to that next step, you're doing some things that keep all the focus on you. And you can, of course, bring on guests that can add to that. But if you focus more on the solo content first, there's so much more to be gained. And that's something that I want to help people learn, because I don't hear a lot of coaches speaking specifically about that. The common approach to podcasting is you start a show and you find guests and you have conversations. And I get it. That's how podcasting has been built. And that's how a lot of shows have become popular. But there's still a lot to that solo approach. And I feel if you really lean into that with all your power, there is a lot to be gained.
Let's dive deep into solo podcasting. So me, I just, start my vidyard recording, and I record videos. I publish them on YouTube. My assistant might republish them on podcasting platform if the content is great. What how should the content be different on podcasting than it is on other platforms? Because podcasting is a word that's used interchangeably. I see that your episodes are quite short. They're under 10 minutes. How do you build them? Is it like the 3 ways to do X? Tell me about the whole process and why you're so bullish on solo podcasting.
The way that I build it, I found that the best window, and this came from looking at other podcasters that do things solo, talking to other podcasters, and even some of the people that I have in my circle that I've gained through podcasting. What is the typical range that you would look for in regards to a podcast? When a guest podcast comes around, typically what people are saying is around 30 minutes. That's the sweet spot. And factoring in the solo approach where it's just you, I felt 10 to 30 was probably the window that I wouldn't want to be under or over. Under 10 minutes, you may be shortchanging your listener and not really giving them enough. Over 30 minutes, you may be overextending your stay. So you want to make sure you hit them in that period where they're going to be engaged with what you're saying. You want to get them from the start to the finish. So you want to start with value, get into that value as soon as you possibly can. Don't start off with a 10-minute monologue that isn't anything about the content. Just dive into why that person showed up so you can keep them engaged right from the start. I don't do anything in regards to scripting. I do bullet points, and I come into each episode understanding exactly what I want to talk about. When you script things out and you just start reading, it comes through, and you may not feel like it is, but it is. And it can turn a person off because they don't want to feel like they're listening to an audiobook. Or if you don't have any energy or emotion or inflection in your voice when you're reading, it can make a person's listener experience just much less in regards to something you want to continue to stay tuned into. So having those bullet points and building your content around your zone of genius is going to help you create compelling content, because I guarantee you, if your podcast is built around your brand and around the items within your brand that you are most passionate about, you can talk about them in much more detail than you think. So if you plot out what you want to talk about so you can keep things on track, you don't wander too far off of that platform or off of that format, and really dig in to what you want to talk about, you can hit that time mark, and you can create something that's going to attract good listeners that are looking for that exact information, keep them there, and then keep them coming back for future episodes. That's my approach to content creation as a whole, but it really gets granular when you look at the solo side of it.
Where else do you recycle that content? Do you also make text out of vocal content, or do you take that initial text, then it becomes a podcast, and then you post it on LinkedIn? Is there some repurposing going on in there?
What I decided to do with my show as of now was to take it off social media, focus mainly on building the podcast content, YouTube, email, and my website. I want those to serve as the primary resources. And then as that element grows, I can start to factor in more on the social media side. So more than likely what I'll do is bring LinkedIn back into the equation first and then build from there.
Interesting. And I want to ask, you've been on various podcasts as a guest. How is it that you do that? Do you pull out a list, reach out? How have you been on so many podcasts?
I used a service called Podmatch for a long time, and I swear by it. It's a great service. Because I've gone on the solo route and I'm tightening things up, what I've been doing is just my own research. And it's a very primitive process when you really think about it. But what I do is just use Google, and I look for podcasts for coaches and consultants. What are they listening to? What kind of content is out there for them? And they're the audience that I want to connect with. So speaking to those podcasters it's the best approach for me. So I look at what their show has to offer, and I build myself a template where my first outreach is just building a Loom video. And then from there, doing a couple follow-ups, because we don't always get the first response, but it's all about bringing a very compelling pitch or presentation to the forefront and leading with strength. And Charles, as a podcaster, you're probably, you know this, you're inundated with pitch after pitch. And sometimes they are so far off the mark from what you're looking for that you probably just discard that and don't ever think about it again. And that's, as a podcaster, I've experienced it too. So I've seen very bad presentations come my way that speak nothing to the main points that I need to know. So how do I know this person is the right fit? Yeah, they may say, oh, I'm the perfect fit for your show, but they're also saying that to 50 other podcasts that they're reaching out to. I'm looking at a podcast that speaks to the right audience for me, and I want to lead with strength and let them know what they're doing well, what I find so compelling about the content they're creating, and how I can lend more to that creation. I'm not looking to be, oh, you got to have me on the show, I'm the be all end all guest, because that's how some people talk. It drives me nuts. I don't know if I'm the perfect fit for that podcast. You have to determine that. But here's me. This is what I can bring to the table. If you think I'm a good fit, let's talk. Let's figure out a good way to connect with your audience and create some great content they can sink their teeth into. If I'm not a good fit, tell me, and I'll move on. If you overcomplicate this process, you miss out on a lot of opportunities. And if you don't lead with strength, and if you try to make it all about yourself instead about that creator, you're going to miss opportunities as well. That's how I've been able to get more in regards to appearances, because I've said, I like what you're doing. This is what stood out to me. Here's how I can add value to what you're creating. If you feel that aligns with what you're trying to do, let's talk about how we make it happen. Very, very simple. I'm removing all of the arrogance from it. I'm not telling them they have to have me or else. And once we've got that interview in place, I focus on bringing value. That question I asked you before we started, what can I do to bring the most impact to your show? I ask that of every person I connect with, because at the end of the day, it's all about making sure your audience is hearing great content that excites them, that educates them, that informs them. The more you do that, the better off you're going to be in the long run, and the more your message is going to resonate. And that's what this is all about.
What's next for you, Jason? There's 4 months remaining to the year. What are your objectives?
Well, as we roll towards the end of 2023, as I get this whole law firm initiative off the ground, that's where a lot of my focus will be. And then rolling into 2024, I haven't set my long-term goals for the year yet, but I know this year is all about continuing to build something valuable for the people that I've already connected with, and the ones that I know I'm going to be connecting with in the next few months through all my guest appearances.
Love it, dude. Where can people find out more about you?
Best place to go is jasoncercone.com. I've got some free resources there. You can connect with my podcast. And if you want to take advantage of a discovery call to learn more about what you can do to lean into podcasting, that's a free 30-minute call with me. Just fill out the form and we'll make it happen.